Kelsey. I'm one of the associate directors of the Center for New Media Teaching and Learning. We want to welcome you to this session on case studies. It was 2.5 years ago at our last New Media Education Conference that we had a session with then Vice Dean of Journalism, David Claytell, where he told you that the Center and the Journalism School were going to together be embarking on a case study initiative with the school. And we showed you one sample case about building the front page of the Washington Post and discussed how case study pedagogy was the journalism school's attempt to get away from what Dean Claytell called teaching by anecdote, and instead to put more decision-making and analysis in the hands of students. As many of you are probably familiar, case teaching has been around for a long time, but what you might not know is that up until now it has not been part of the educational practices in schools of journalism. But as you'll see in here from our faculty partner today, it's a different kind of teaching. It leads to a different kind of classroom conversation, and hopefully, if we do our job well, to some students who think at a little bit higher level when it comes to decision making in their newsroom careers. The Center got involved because the journalism school's goal was and is not to just apply the traditional case methodology wholesale from somewhere else, but to infuse the case method with new media as appropriate. As we just heard from Dean Lemon, there's a revolution going on in journalism now, and we believe that the case study model within the journalism school should take that into account. And so our goal here is to evolve the case approach into something innovative and substantive that can be shared with other journalism schools across the country and ideally around the world. So Dean Claytell mentioned at the last presentation that there was some fundraising going on to help make this a formal office in the School of Journalism, and we're very pleased to report that the Knight Foundation came through with funds to do just that, and so we now have something called the Knight Case Studies Initiative at the School of Journalism, and that's headed up by Kirsten Lundberg, who's here with us today. She's in the front, and we'll be hearing from her towards the end of the presentation. Kirsten and her team of writers and some of our staff created a set of 8 cases, they're sort of scrolling here behind me, that were bravely taught by our faculty partner, Michael Shapiro, who's here with us today, and this last spring semester. So what we're going to do is use this session to show you and tell you about what this experience has been like so far and where we'll be heading in the future. So what's going to happen is Michael, along with some help from Rob Garfield, one of the Center's educational technologists, is we're going to demonstrate one of the cases. And so I'd ask those of you in the audience to be ready because from what I hear, you might be called upon during the case. So be listening. And this case is about the New England Cable News Channel, the television station. It's a case where we focused on creating a classroom environment using technology where Michael, with some help from Rob, can bring media into the class during the case conversation and change the dynamics of that conversation depending on what students bring up and what they're talking about. And we think this is a really interesting way of thinking about the use of technology when it comes to case teaching. So we'll do that for a few minutes after a brief introduction about things happening in journalism from Michael, and then a few words about what the experience has been like for students and for him as a teacher. And then we'll have Kirsten come up and say a few words about the initiative, and then take whatever questions you have with the time that remains. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to pick up, before I move into the cases, to talk a little bit about what Nick was talking about in terms of the changes that are taking place technologically at the school. And I think that the best example of doing this is to talk about a website that my students are working on now. It's a live website, and they are covering Brooklyn. And the idea is that this is a website which is not only current, and they have to be feeding the beast, as we say in our field all the time, but they have to be thinking about it in imaginative ways and telling stories in new ways. The key thing here becomes ever more clearly that the reporting in many ways remains the same, the responsibility, the notion of it, as Nick spoke about. But the way the stories get told is an altogether new thing and an altogether new, very exciting thing. I mean, the dirty little secret in our line of work, in journalism, is that when people think back of what it was like 25, 30 even 35 years ago, if you think of the great newspapers, and you think of the great newspaper stories, Watergate, Woodward and Bernstein, what have you, covering Vietnam, there really were great shining moments. But I suspect for many of you, if you did not grow up reading the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, or the New York Times, or the Washington Post, probably grew up reading a pretty boring newspaper with a lot of dutiful and dull stories told in dutiful and dull ways. And as soon as something better and free came along, people grabbed it. So the idea that's happening at the school now, and it's really happening quite widely, it's not just my class, but I thought I would show you what my people are doing, is to do nothing less than reinvent journalism. So you have here something called the Brooklyn Ink. This was started last year by my class of 2007. It's been continued but upgraded and made more ambitious by this year's class, and no doubt next year's class will do even more so. Let me give you an example. I mean, what we're doing is we're covering the election, but we have to do it from the perspective of Brooklyn, which means we're not just doing local congressional races and Senate races, state Senate races, which would be dull, but to finding the foot soldiers who are leaving Brooklyn and going out to Pennsylvania to work on the Obama campaign, or working in Brooklyn trying to work on the McCain campaign, to charting what's been going on in our borough that we're covering in terms of the economic crisis, is something we call the gathering storm. Can you click on that? Go down a little bit, something that says the gathering storm. We even found our own Joe the plumber in Brooklyn, and he had many interesting things to say. Let's click on that, can we, Rob? The gathering storm. You can see, just scroll down a little bit. If you click on any one of those, if we can scroll down, if you click on here, what you'll see is voices, or you'll see the text boxes of people talking about, in very, very brief ways, about what's going on in their lives. Can we get that? Is that coming up? There it is. And we just click on the more. Yeah. Are you seeing it? Click on the, where it says more, a little bit further over, yeah. Anyway, and people are talking about their lives. I just want to show you one other one. Can we go back to the home page? Which is my favorite piece for right now. Last year they did a video show of an underground pillow fight in Williamsburg, such as the kind of thing that students find. Who let the dogs out? Can we go to that? It's an audio slideshow. This is a story that typically would have been told in print with photographs, and it would have been okay. But if we can scroll down and show it, by doing it as an audio slideshow, people talking and watching, and it's about young men's relationship, young men from Brownsville, relationship with their scary dogs. Can we click on that? Would we be able to hear it? Can we hear it? If we can't hear it, is it?
Once you got a pit bull, you ain't got to worry about nothing. You see what I'm saying?
Why?
Because, I mean, I could have slapped her off the chain right now, and she ain't gonna go nowhere. Just because of the way she's trained, understand what I'm saying? Like, this is me. I mean, this is my first child. So, I mean, respect her as my child.
Little dogs. Little dogs,
Please don't anybody say what a cute dog is. They're mean dogs.
Yorkie Terriers and things like that.
But you get the sense of it. This is the kind of thing that we're doing now, and it's called the BrooklynInc.com. If you get a chance to log in, we update all the time, and I'm, as I say in Yiddish, kvelling for my students.
You guys don't have enough energy for me. But you know, he'll lay down and roll over.
Let's talk about cases. But thank you. I wanted to show you that because I think it was important to see the new media and technological things that are happening in the school, because what's happening ever more is that we have the advantage of being a place that can experiment, because after all, we're not trying to make money with these things. We're simply just, we are freed from the commercial pressures that newsrooms are encumbered with. And as a result, interesting things are happening. The case class. What happened is, I suspect I was chosen to do this because I was a school Luddite. And I still edit stories in paper and pencil. And so I was perceived as somebody, if I could become a convert, then surely everybody could. So what happened was, the conceit of the class was actually kind of simple, which was that we have forever been training our students to make decisions about the stories that they have to do. Which is to say, you'll have an assignment or you come up with an idea, and you have to make a series of decisions about how am I going to get the story, how am I going to conceive of the story, how am I going to fill in all the gaps of the story, and how am I going to write the story, and parenthetically, how am I going to deal with the fact that my editor doesn't like it. But those are solipsistic decisions, for lack of a better way to put it. But the problem is, as the business is changing, people have to make decisions in journalism that have to do more with just what they are doing. This is not just a matter of, it would have been 10, 15 years ago in a much more hierarchical structure of like, one day you become a boss and you get to tell people what to do. The fluidity of the way things work now, especially with the web, means that everybody is essentially within a very short period of time, if not immediately, a boss. So you are going to have to make decisions that have an impact not only upon what you are doing, but upon what everybody around you is doing. The initial conceit, I can tell you somewhat sheepishly, was to sort of see the class as the boss class. And the turnout and the interest in it was nil. Because nobody wants to say, I want to be a boss, and nobody wanted to be perceived as somebody who wants to be a boss because it's not cool. And nobody wanted to be in classes with people who said, I want to be a boss. So we dropped that very, very quickly and changed it really to something that in which you were going to be aware of the fact that, again, you have to make decisions about things that happen beyond the scope of the story that you yourself are working on that day. So what happened is that Kirsten and her team went out and found an initial group of 8 really interesting cases. And the cases that were presented to the students, such things as, you are working in the Albany Times Union, a mid-sized paper in Albany, and the newsroom is being reorganized. What do you do first? Do you change furniture? Do you go completely online? Do you buy a new printing press? You have to make these decisions. And because it wasn't just the editor making the decisions, more and more people were drawn into it. It became quite illuminating. Or you were working at ABC News, and you get photos, and photos come to you that were taken, allegedly taken, purportedly taken, in the context of that very infamous Duke rape case with the lacrosse team. Do you run the photos or not? You are working for the Far Eastern Economic Review and for Dow Jones, which is the parent company, and the government of Singapore is suing you because they don't like something that you wrote about the government of Singapore, which is about the Lee family. Do you fight them knowing that you're going to lose? Do you give in? Do you leave? What do you do? But I think my favorite of these cases, this is not the one I'm going to speak about now, favorite in terms of the kind of reaction we got to students, and this was the really illuminating thing, involved a case in Bakersfield, California, a small paper, Bakersfield, California, in which a young reporter was asked to not only cover the trial, but to blog at the same time. And the reporter just couldn't do it. She couldn't get in her head that she should write quick dispatches from the courtroom and then watch a trial, so she couldn't do it. And I would have thought that after 15 years at the school, the students would have said, "Aw, the boss is being mean and unfair, and they're not allowing her to do her job right." The students would have none of it. They thought she was a whiner, that she was a baby, that she had to do it, that she should have sold the boss on a new way of doing it, and if she couldn't do it, they would, which was really fantastic. So what happened is that we went through a series of these, and the one that I've done in presentations such as this has been the one which, for your sake, involves no prior reading, which is why I chose it. But it doesn't mean that I won't ask you questions. So, and I'm not going to say who, so you have to be ready. This involved a story at New England Cable News. New England Cable News is a highly esteemed news gathering operation in the Boston area. Very, very well respected, filled with very, very good people, and perceived year in, year out at the time the story breaks as a place that people take seriously and is seen as, and regards itself as a source of serious news. This is not Greta von Susteren, okay? This is serious stuff. So what happens is one day in the newsroom of New England Cable News, a fax arrives. Can we hit number 1 there, Rob?
A fax came into our news desk, our assignment desk, in the afternoon, mid-afternoon. It was a fax from a law firm that said that one of the New England Patriots players, a very well-known player named Terry Glenn, was being sued for sexual assault. And obviously this was a story of real interest to us.
Okay, let's stop it there. Let me, at the risk of being overly graphic, but I will nonetheless read you the facts. You need to know the facts in order to be able to sort of think about this. A law firm named Rayner and Rayner of Revere, I'm going to extrapolate here a little bit, has filed suit, so the fact says, in Suffolk County Superior Court, charging Terry Glenn with having approached a young woman named Felicia Jones and inflicting upon her civil battery, emotional distress, and also charges him with offensive touching. Mr. Glenn, says the suit, is alleged to have approached Miss Jones's limousine outside of a nightclub and yelled, "Get out of my limo, bitches." And after 3 attempts to enter the limousine, he urinated on the vehicle. You are allowed to be shocked. Okay. Mr. Glenn then walked away while his client being Miss Jones, stepped out of the limousine to have a cigarette. Mr. Glenn then approached the woman again and, according to the suit, quote, put his arm around her and grabbed her breast. After pushing Mr. Glenn away, he reached underneath her dress, and so on, and so on, and so on. It's lousy. What you have is a fax from a law firm that is not, I should say, a big-time prominent Boston law firm, alleging that a prominent man has done these things. And in real time, you have to make a decision. Do you run with it, or what do you do? Now, I know that there are non-journalists in the room, so I'm especially curious as to what your impulse would be. Great story. Would anybody say, oh, thank you very much. I feel like Phil Donahue. Where's Phil Donahue? Would anybody simply run with that story? Anybody? Come on. Well, let me step back for a moment and sort of explain that what's going on, it's not on? Can you hear me now? This goes to the heart of what might best be called the journalistic id. No superego, no should. Should we, shouldn't we? This is all about, wow, what a great story. Now, when I speak to journalists about this, there's always half the hands in the room going, not a one of you, huh? Come on, a little bit? No? Why not? No, get out of here. You guys don't count. You're cheating. Why not? Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do it? You would. I love this. I'm going to come over to you. Why would you do it? Come over to our side, the dark side.
Wait, you're asking as a journalist what would I do? Because I want to get recognition for a hot story.
Anything wrong with that?
You're not asking about ethics.
What? What if it's not? Not true. Yeah, there is that. There was said, what if it's not true? You don't want to let the facts stand in the way of a good story, do you? I do. So nobody else, right? Nobody else wants to do this. Meanwhile, at New England Cable News, it goes further. Number 2 there, Rob? Oh, no, excuse me, number 5. Thank you. Needless to say, a juicy story.
My initial reaction on hearing the story was, I raised an eyebrow. I mean, you know, frankly, when you hear a good story, there's a certain amount of you, and a journalist that goes, oh, this is kind of juicy. The same way in the audience, when you hear a story that's frankly sort of titillating, you say, interesting.
Is there another part to that now? Is number 6? Look into the dark soul of the journalist is what you're getting to do now.
Well, this is potentially an enormous story. First of all, Boston and New England in general are huge sports communities. The Patriots, an exceptionally popular team in town, second only to the Red Sox, at the time had been through a couple of sex scandals, misbehavior scandals, drug scandals. This was a potentially very big story. Terry Glenn was a very popular and controversial figure on the team. This was a lead story if it were true.
Yeah, the true thing. as anybody thinking, other than my convert over here, that, wait a second, there's a competitive imperative here. If we don't run it, someone else will, and we will be late and not first. Does that resonate for anybody? Well, see, I feel like Darth Vader, and you're Luke. You're nodding your head, sort of sheepish, like, you would? A little?
I understand the competition, but I don't know that I know the story. I just want to find out some more information.
Oh, yes, what? I'm sorry.
I understand the competition, obviously, but I'd still probably have to get some more information before thinking about running the story.
What would you need to get to satisfy you?
Well, this is coming from which law firm? Her law firm?
She is
right.
The firm representing her.
Right.
Okay?
No criminal charges, no follow-up with the police department to find out if a complaint. Right.
Posed the question. You just said.
Right.
So what would you do?
I would call the jurisdictional police department and find out was there a complaint filed.
Okay. So you would call you all heard that. Call the cops. Was there a complaint filed, sir?
Well, I feel like the first question is you'd want to make sure that, that it actually was originating from, there's someone actually is suing him. That it's, if someone's suing him, that's a story in and of itself, even if it's completely wrong. But you'd want to make sure that you didn't just get a fax that showed up out of the blue and you're believing it.
True. I think both very fair points. One, it's just a fax. My grandmother could have sent it. Great practical jokester. But let's assume that my grandmother didn't. That had a letterhead, and somebody in the office said, yeah, I knew these guys, they represented my wife, don't ask. But you also said now an important thing, which is, let's ask the cops. Let's ask the cops. So they call the cops, I'm not giving anything away, and the cops say, no incident report. But you still have the juicy story. No incident report, legitimate law firm, juicy story. Id, superego, ego, battling for the journalistic soul. What would you think, though, and I'm going to wrap this up to questions and I'll tell you what happens at the end, of the news. Here you have a situation, though, for students where they have to make a decision in real time. It's a little bit frightening, I suspect, for the non-journalists in this room to look inside the sausage factory, okay? So let's hit number 2 and come back to the choice. Am I blocking the point of view? Okay.
My initial reaction was, this is a legitimate story. Let's go with it. This is a story of a significant public figure, well known, a very serious charge. This is something that we have to look into. The question then became, do we look into it first, set a reporter on it, photographer, producers, look into this as much as we can, and then put it on the air, or do we report the very fact that we had received a fax and that there has been a civil lawsuit filed against Terry Glenn, and should we do that immediately? As a 24-hour news channel, that is something that we can and do often, which is we quickly respond to the news. We don't have to wait for, a primetime program to be over. Oprah Winfrey doesn't have to be, we're not worried about those things. We're doing news all the time. So it's very easy for us to put it into the news pipeline and get it on the air very quickly.
Okay, so here you are. Here is your choice. If you wait, you risk getting beat. If you run with a story, you are first with a potentially really interesting story. The law firm is legitimate. The fax is legitimate as well. There is no incident report. If you wait, someone else in your mind is going to say, I heard about that on Fox. I heard about this over here. Now, there's also an interim thing you can do. If this was a newsroom, what you would say is, well, let's get something up on the web, and then we can fix it if it's wrong. I'm telling you tales from the inner sanctums of journalism. off the record. No, and this is one of the great imperatives now that happens in journalism. Get it up on the web instantly, because speed is a virtue, and if it's wrong, we'll fix it. How many of you would risk putting up a quick thing that says, New England Patriots embattled, because he's been in trouble before, New England Patriots wide receiver Terry Glenn has been sued by a woman in Revere for sexual harassment. More to come. How many of you would do this? And the assumption being that, I'm going to walk back here, you would do it, why?
Well, because if it's true, then you were the first ones to get it out, and people will know that. Well, you can always print a disclaimer, but the fact is, she is suing him, so that is right.
She is suing him, but her accusation is now news, right? Terry Glenn has been accused, and you're not writing a big story, you're not writing a long thing, you're just saying, by the way, Terry Glenn is being sued. It's like, we'll find out later, but we're just going to say it. Yes?
Wouldn't you confirm it with the law firm?
You could call up the law firm and say, hi, we got your facts, is this true? And the lawyer goes, uh-huh. It's true, we are suing him. Oh, do we have to get the other side? Okay, I don't know. That's just so 1980s, right? So you get the, but here's the thing. Time is a-wasting. Right now, in this age in which we live, even on the Brooklyn Ink, you could say, just post it. Get it up there instantly. Terry Glenn sued. Several of you raised your hands. If it was the New York Times, if it was a newspaper the following day. Remember, this is 1999. It may as well be the Paleozoic era, because that news station, New England Cable News, now has a website. And they could post it instantly. They don't have to worry about Oprah. They don't have to worry about anything. They exist in the here and now. But here's the question that I'll leave you with. Once you post it, can you take it back? No. Don't you feel ashamed? No. You could follow it up with something else, but once you post it, even though it's ephemeral, it's not on paper, it is there. Would you run the risk of being used wrong? It's a hard decision. It's a hard decision. So ultimately what the decision comes down to is, do we run or do we wait? And do we report it ourselves? You want to know what happened? They waited, they didn't run it, they reported it themselves. Glenn's attorney denied it. She filed suit anyway, and a year and a half later, Glenn settled with her out of court. The point was, this was not an easy decision. And the fact that you, again, this is 1999, the fact that you could actually post something immediately really complicates it. And I can tell you that the ongoing war in newsrooms across the country, high and low, okay, in terms of the journalistic content that they put out, is about speed versus wise. Because it just used to be the AP or UPI or Reuters putting out stuff immediately. Everybody can do it now. And I can tell you that journalists lose sleep over this because, as he said, it's a juicy story. Even he said it, he who would later say, it doesn't pass the smell test for me. So here you have an example, obviously abbreviated, of a case that students have to grapple with in real time. Let me take this back in here. That said, are there questions about it? Which I could turn things over to Kirsten as well. Do you have any questions about this case or the other cases or anything else that we're doing? Yeah. I know you. Used to be at the school. Well, anyway.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you use it in the classroom. And in other words, for example, do you give it the general scenario, like the way you gave it to us? Do you give it to them on paper? How do they access the video?
Oh, yeah.
Do they access it after? You know, that the whole.
What happens is the students are given a link with a URL. And there's actually, I mean, I think we have some examples of that there. Like, as you see on the screen right now, there's not just a, you know, in the old days you would have gotten a text file, but now there's a URL to read that gives you all the background, as is traditional in the case method, all the background you need. I should explain a little bit about how the class works, because I'm not just coming in and saying, what do you think? Because pedagogically speaking, that class would be a gut. They'd show up, they'd talk, and then they wouldn't take it very seriously. What happens is everybody has to read the URL, the file, the background, and they have to read. This one happens in real time. It's somewhat different. But for most of them, you get to the point where there's a decision, and Kirsten's going to talk a little bit about the methodology here. But everybody has to come to class having posted on a class list a memo of no more than 500 words, because more than that, people just tend to gas, making an argument. And the arguments are fascinating. I mean, what really makes the class hum along is that people come in knowing what everybody else has come up with. And the disagreements are fascinating and often quite unpredictable. But you have to come in having thought about this and made a case. And what's really neat about it is that if you're not the master of your brief, if you haven't really thought this out, if you have a case predicated on the notion of should, like we should be better people, you're going to get chewed up. As you should, because it really pushes people to be incisive and wise about the complicated decisions they have to make. Let me take one more question, because then I want to let Kirsten sort of talk about the methodology of the cases. Anybody else? All the things that I've told you about how journalism happens, that wasn't true. We actually sit and ponder these decisions, and we were never guided by anything other than a sense of a clear sense of public responsibility. And if you believe that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn that I'd like to say. Thank you very much.
Maybe we better save this microphone for questions. But let me just say, first of all, I think you all can understand now why Michael's class was subscribed and fully subscribed and oversubscribed. So he's been a great advertisement for this way of teaching. I can hardly see anybody. I do want to point out that this case is an anomaly. Of the 8 we have, it's the only one that is a video case and which takes place in real time in the classroom. All the other cases are presented on the URL that Michael was talking about, and they are to be read by all the students in advance, who then, responding to a prompt that Michael gives them, a study question, do go online and in a forum, a classroom forum, express their initial opinions about the case and about what's going on here, and then that is followed up by the case discussion. So in the classroom, I don't have time to really go into all the ramifications of the case method, but let me just say briefly that in my way of thinking, the case study is a vehicle, and the actual product is the class discussion. That's what we value, and that's what we're trying to set the stage for, if you like, by writing a case that presents a decision to which there is no single correct answer. That's very important. If we stop the case at a point where it's obvious what should be done next, the students are going to wrap up the class in about 5 minutes, and the faculty member will have 85 minutes to fill with hot air. So we need a difficult decision, and then we need at least 2 equally plausible courses of action that can be taken. So we try to foreshadow a little bit what will happen if you go route A or route B. The task of the students, and what we hope they're learning by using the case method of teaching, is to analyze a situation. What is the problem here? Is there even a problem here? Diagnose it, prescribe a solution, be prepared to defend that solution, and then also learn how to listen to others and maybe be persuaded by them. So we think they're acquiring habits of analysis and diagnosis, but also habits of behavior, which can be really helpful to them, we hope, once they're back in the workplace. So they're learning content, but they're also learning how to negotiate difficult work situations. Let me say that we're really excited to have been able to work with CC and MTL to get these cases to be online and multimedia. There has been a lot of resistance. I came from the Kennedy School at Harvard, and I was real briefly at the business school there, and I know that there's been some resistance to using online and multimedia in other fields. I feel if we can't make it fly in journalism, where can we ever make it fly? Because journalism is multimedia these days. So I'm pleased to say that, you know, I've met some of my colleagues across the university, certainly Liz Gordon, who's here from the business school, but also I sat down with someone from the medical school the other day. I know some folks at public health are looking at the case method. I would hope that all of us who are in our tiny ways working on this in individual corners of the university might be able to at some point come together and address this more comprehensively. So that's my really brief overview, because I know we have only 10 minutes and I know there are some questions out there.
I'm Dr. Trindad. I have been a microbiologist trainee at Columbia. So if there are any things doubtful and out of tune, you can blame Columbia for my training and education here. I'm a microbiologist, and I'm talking from the scientific point of view. On the media recently, people falling off the Golden State Bridge, I don't know if you saw it on TV, it is said that about 50% of college students have at some time in their life a tendency towards suicide. Now, there were many cases of school children and other suicide episodes in the US, and I didn't see any proper analysis, any proper report subjected to the public with regard to how and why the students commit suicide or are prone to it. One of the causes given by Dr. Phil was loneliness, feeling of helplessness as some of the causes, and being left alone and so on. When these cases came up, I saw no report either by the superintendents or by the principals or by the counselors to analyze these 4 or 5 incidents of students suicide committing with shootings to follow. So this, I think, is a deficit on the part of the personnel, and I think something can be done about it. I don't know, using multimedia or other means of technology. This is just a proposal.
Thank you. I think we all agree with that, and unfortunately I am not in a position to address that problem.
Hi. So I'm wondering about, I mean, the video example you used is very obviously something that is unique to the sort of electronic environment. But for a lot of these other ones, what is it that doing this online lets you do differently than it would be handing this out in a, you know, in the previous class? What is it about doing this online that's different than you could do otherwise?
Really good question, and I've struggled with that a lot, frankly, and I think it's one of the things that Ryan and I and Frank Moretti discussed when we first got into this is, you know, we didn't want to do the multimedia stuff qua bells and whistles. We wanted it to add educational value. I'd have to say we've been at this for about 18 months now, and my preliminary feedback in answer to your question is that in some cases it adds a lot more than in others. Specifically, we have a case about Frontline and the making of a documentary. We couldn't have done it without the multimedia format because we give the students examples of specific scenes from a documentary that a producer intends to use, and then we give them a scene which they must decide about whether this is relevant to the topic of the documentary or not. They can look, they happen to be outtakes, but the students aren't told that they're outtakes. And they get to look at the actual footage. It's the whole case is dependent on doing that. Likewise, the case that was mentioned here about ABC News and the photographs, we, through happy coincidence, when Michael was teaching this course, it became apparent that none of the students nor Michael himself had realized that the word photographs was a link. So no one had gone and looked at the photographs. So we had 45 minutes of discussion in the classroom with the students basically saying, of course we run photographs. We're in the media. You know, this is the stuff we do. This is our bread and butter. A picture tells 1,000 words, that whole thing. And then when we pointed out, would you like to see the photographs? Well, not those photographs. And it changed their conception of what it was that they were looking at almost 180 degrees. And that's what's great about the case method. If you can get an aha moment like that out of students, they've learned a lot. I mean, the point of most of these cases is the world isn't black and white, it's gray. And guess what? Decisions are made by people like you and me every day, all over these newsrooms and in the editorial offices and in the publishers' offices. And we do the best we can with imperfect information, and here's a chance to try it in the classroom so that we hope you'll be better at it when you have to do it in real life, because your turn's coming soon. Any other questions about what we're trying to do? I should say I brought some brochures. There aren't very many, but if anyone's interested just in looking at these cases, they are password protected, most of them, although we have 2 that are up for free on our website. Feel free to go and look at those. If you'd like to look at one of the ones that's password protected, I'd be very happy to give you a temporary login and password with the assistance of my colleagues at CCNMTL.
Looks like there's another one in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, hi, yeah. I'm Larry Amsel. I teach psychiatry up at the medical school, and actually when it comes to teaching psychiatry or any other clinical science, there's absolutely no substitute for bedside learning, what we used to call bedside learning. And I think that what we have, in the last several years started doing is using video clips when we have patient permission to do that, because otherwise you have to just be lucky to have, quote unquote lucky, to have the right patient, so make sure that your students see all of the things that they have to. And these, I've used these in teaching psychiatry, and it's been just invaluable. I mean, if a picture says 10,000 words, a video must be 1 billion, because it's just absolutely invaluable. 3 to 5 minutes of watching a patient talking to a clinician is worth so much babble otherwise, and really gives people an insight. And so I think that application is undoubtedly useful. So I was just wondering about your thoughts about how to proceed with that.
Absolutely, and that's why we were really excited to have this video here, where the faculty member can decide which clips to use depending on where the conversation is going in the class. Let me say a few words about the role of the faculty member in a case-based course. Ideally, at least at the Harvard Business School, which has written the Bible on this stuff, the faculty member is heard from 15% of the time. That means the students are running the conversation. The faculty member is the facilitator, but should have a plan in mind for what it is that he or she wants the students to go away from the class thinking about. So there is probably some more theoretical construct for the discussion, and the case is a practical example of, it illustrates a theory, or it's a concrete example of a more theoretical point that is being covered in that particular class. So the role of the faculty member is quite different from a lecture model. On the other hand, the students are not only teaching one another, they often instruct the faculty member. And I think those of you who have, thank you for your vote of confidence on this method. I think faculty who have tried this have experienced how exciting it can be to have classes in which they're also learning and growing and expanding their understanding of what's going on. So yes, the video is very powerful, and one of our plans actually is to start incorporating more video into our cases. It's expensive, and it requires a little bit more logistical arrangements for us to do that, but that is our plan. And I certainly, speaking for myself, I've become a convert to the multimedia approach. I come from print. I'd been writing case studies for 18 years that were print-based, and this has been a lot of fun, and it's very engaging for the students.
Can
Anyone
I ask
else?
a question? I'm from Teachers College.
Hi.
And we start developing cases in the development context. And one of the questions that came up is, how do we deal with protection of human subjects. I know the business school at Harvard, they do real companies, real people, they give them names. How do you deal, or how do others deal? Are we allowed to name ministries of education by name, or countries, or NGOs, or what have you? Are we protected if they don't like how we describe facts?
So you're asking about how we get the permission of the organizations we write about to profile them?
Well, I would get the permission, but do you take real cases, or do you construct them?
We never take anything but real cases. I have never written a case that is disguised or a simulation or made up. I feel that while it can be very effective in certain disciplines to come up with scenarios where you get students to walk through it, that in public policy, which is the world that I operated in for a long time, where there were sunshine laws that governed the free release of public information, I felt that taxpayers were entitled to know what the people we were writing about were doing. In the case of journalism, I think that, our cases to a degree are modeling for our students what they're supposed to be doing. So I've had a fair number of conversations on precisely this point. You can be much more manipulative and can achieve your teaching goals more strategically if you use simulations and scenarios, I think. But I feel that in terms of making the students engage with the material and not allowing them to use the excuse of, oh, this could never happen. You take that excuse away from them when you say, oh, but this did happen. And these are the people we talk to. So when we write our cases, we don't ever, well, let me say, we almost always go out and interview everyone who was involved in the situation that we are writing about, in order to understand various points of view about what was going on and who thought what, and they get quite detailed. If you look at them, you'll see we get down in the weeds. And every organization we've worked with has given us permission to use what we've got, which has been very gratifying.
Okay, well, our time is up, so I want to thank our presenters for this session. So if we could do a round of applause for them.